Hey, it's John Lee Dumas of EO Fire, and it's The Entrepreneurial You, the show for dedicated and passionate Caribbean entrepreneurs seeking daily inspiration, brought to you by author, speaker, and award-winning entrepreneur Heneka Watkis-Porter. You must be prepared to ignite.
All who have accomplished great things have had a great aim, have fixed their gaze on a goal which was high, one which sometimes seemed impossible. Horizon Sweat Mardon. Greetings. How is everyone today? How are you doing? Welcome to episode 95 of the Entrepreneurial You podcast. I'm Heneka Watkis-Porter. Today's episode is with Jared Easley, co-founder and co-organizer for Podcast Movement, the world's largest international conference for the podcast industry. A traditionally published author, Jared is the host of the Starved Adults podcast, which features conversations related to personal and professional development. Interviews include great guests such as Simon Sinek, Gary Vaynerchuk, and Seth Godin. Yes, I've had Seth on this podcast too, so I'm happy about that. Jared has been featured on Entrepreneur.com, Huffington Post, the South Florida Business Journal, among several others. Today, we are going to be talking about strategies to help you build the perfect financial plan for your startup. Welcome, Jared. Before we head into our conversation, I have a fun question for you. Give me your best Jamaican accent.
Heneka, it is very difficult to get to 95 episodes of a podcast, so I hope that anybody's listening to this can fully appreciate the time, effort, energy, maybe a little bit of frustration that's come along this path for you to get to this point. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. And frustration, I have, I can write the book on that. But anyway, the pleasure, the pleasure far outweighs any frustration, any challenge that I'll have to face, because I love talking to, knowledgeable guests like yourself, who I know you're about to share with me and my audience about that perfect financial plan. But before I do that, I have a fun question for you. And just chatting with you, even in our pre-interview chat, I know that you're fun already, so I don't even have to work hard.
Now I'm worried. But
so,
go ahead.
What I want you to do, Jared, is to give me your best Jamaican accent.
Yeah, man.
Oh my God. You couldn't surprise me. Do something better than that, yeah?
Let me see. Yeah, man. I need some festival. I don't know what to say.
Who have you been hanging out with?
Not enough Jamaicans, apparently. But
oh my gosh, you need help.
I have been to Jamaica, and I have had festival, and I didn't want to stop having it. It was something that was so amazing. And there's a popular tourist spot in Jamaica. It's the falls.
Yes,
that's
Falls.
And I went there with some friends, and we got a chance to do that. And I thought that was one of the coolest and most fun experiences I've had out of any place I've visited. So I hope if people go to Jamaica, they'll try that.
Yeah. And second next coolest thing is actually talking with me. So yeah. All right. So now that we have that out of the way, let's get a little more serious and get into the strategies that we want to talk about to build that perfect financial plan for the startups that we have listening, owners of startups and those who intend to start their business and to launch and to go out into that deep end. Now, first, I want to start off by asking this question. Financial planning. Why is it important to have a plan in place, a proper plan in place?
I believe that quote, those who plan to fail, or if they don't plan, they fail. I totally
plan. Those who plan to fail to plan. I mean, those who fail to plan
yes,
to fail.
You're already saving me. This is going to be the best interview that you've ever given. So, but that's so true. I mean, if you don't have some kind of strategy when you're going into what you want to accomplish or what the Lord has put on your heart to do, I think that's biblical too. I don't want to get overly scriptural and Christian in the podcast, but we talked about in the Bible. It talks about you don't build a tower without making a plan. It talks about that. You want to be prepared. There's great ways to be prepared. And the starting of the business that we do now, we didn't have a lot of money, and I'm going to talk about just resources, not just finances. I hope that's okay, because there are some similarities I think in both that will be helpful. Financially, we didn't have this abundant resource to go tap into, and we knew that, and we didn't think it was the right thing to say let's try to create or try to develop something that we personally are not able to support if it fails. And, not that we plan to fail, but at the same time, we don't want to be going into something without having our due diligence, without trying to be as wise as we can within reason. That can be a stumbling block for some because some people overthink it. They think, I got to have this massive, massive plan. I got to have all these things in line. There are times when that's true, and there's times when, maybe you don't need everything to be perfect. You need some basics covered, but then there's other parts like faith. You got to take that step toward action. You don't need to do that in a foolish way. We decided to do crowdfunding, and for us, that was our validation. We realized, okay, if we don't have the money to put towards something that could potentially fail, it's going to make sense for us to test and validate this idea. And the best way that we, at the moment, this was 2014, we decided to do a crowdfunding campaign. We created a Kickstarter campaign. Now, for those who may not be familiar or as familiar with crowdfunding campaigns, there are some that, like a GoFundMe or something, where you can just keep collecting the money as it comes in. There's no required amount that you have to reach. If you reach it, that's great. But even if you're well below your goal, you can still collect that money. Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I know that some of the platforms, if you don't make a set amount that you set out to reach, then you don't get it at all. But so there are some, and it's just, essentially for those of us, those who are listening right now, it's just a crowdfunding, as the name suggests, giving a little. It really is a little from a lot to get to a particular goal. So it could be $1, but if you're getting $1 from 1,000 people, you've gotten $1,000.
Right. And that's the wisdom that we followed, or, I say wisdom, but that was the strategy that we decided to pursue. Let's create a Kickstarter campaign. Kickstarter, if you do not reach your goal, you do not get to keep the money. And we liked that. We felt like that was correct. If we cannot reach, let's say, $10,000, then we have no business trying to pursue this idea, because it's likely going to be too costly or take too long to create a result that makes sense or that's worth it. So we did that. We said the minimum number we need to collect is $10,000. That is not enough to do what we were aspiring to do, but it was enough to validate it. And so that's the strategy we took. Now the people.
And then hold that thought, because that you're heading into our strategy, which we're going to be getting into later, and that is like kind of introducing part of perhaps a strategy for a solid plan for a startup, right? So we talked about what's important, what financial planning is, and why it's important to have one. One of the things we want to look at before we even get into the strategy is what are the factors that would be influencing an entrepreneur finances, for a business? Are there factors such as upbringing? For example, what role does a person's mental state and cultural background, sociological background have to do with their personal finances as it relates to starting a business?
Well, for me, that answer might not be the traditional answer that you are expecting. For me, that answer was, how do I continue to provide for my family and meet the responsibilities that I currently have, while also having the flexibility to create and grow what I feel led to do? So for me personally, it wasn't about being debt free. It wasn't about having this emergency fund. It wasn't. And I'm not saying those things are wrong. Those things are absolutely smart. For me, that wasn't the position or the place that I was in. And I hope people hear this, because there are some that will say, well, I don't have this criteria, and since I don't have this criteria, maybe that just means I'm not eligible, or I don't have the opportunity in a reasonable time frame to go accomplish something meaningful. And I hope that people hear this and realize that's not true. What road that I chose to take, which may or may not be ideal for some, is I was let go from a job, which I didn't expect. I had done everything reasonably, well. I had showed up on time. Clients liked me. It was December of 2013, and they let me go. And I was one of 10 people that got let go. And in that moment, I realized, okay, Lord willing, in the future, I will have a little more ability to say what I want to do with my career. And so I need to think in terms of what roles are out there that give me the flexibility to build. For me, that was 1099 contract work. So if for someone who's not started yet and you're in a day job, congratulations, you're absolutely normal. And that would be something I would say to consider. Okay, maybe you don't have that emergency fund. Maybe you unfortunately have some school loans or you have some debt. That doesn't mean you can't still do something that makes sense and that's wise, as long as you're being responsible. So for me, that was transitioning into a role that had and allowed more flexibility. So for me, I became a contracted project manager, basically, where I would work with different businesses and I had flexibility. It was more results driven than tapping a time clock, if that makes sense. So for me, that was the path that I took. I said, I need flexibility. I found positions that allowed me to work, to make the income I needed to be responsible toward my family and take care of the things that I'm a steward over, like my mortgage and different payments. And then on the side, that's where, and I'm not trying to drive this into strategy, although I probably will like that conversation better, but that's what I did. I found free time outside of the flexible work hours that I was, able to have. And then that gave me a chance to say, okay, now how do I start building? So I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, but for me in the situation I was in, that was where I was at the time.
Well, I mean, it was where you were. And so it's your story. And what I always like is that whatever we're talking about, that persons listening can actually relate it to something that we've actually been through. So persons know that, you're not just coming and sharing opinions, but you're actually speaking from experience. So that's pretty good. I think now it's just about a good time for us to go into the strategy and kind of look at a roadmap, as it were, if ever there is one, a roadmap to having a solid financial plan. Because for the entrepreneur and the startup, there are so many factors to consider, and so many concerns that you have regarding finances. How do I get financing for my business? Where do I start? Who can I turn to? And there are so many things that factors that would be affecting that. So let's go through that strategy that we can take. And perhaps, as you've been doing, Jared, let's continue to talk from experience.
So the crowdfunding campaign that we mentioned, we didn't have a large email list. So there's a number of criteria you can read online to say, okay, to better your chances to have a successful crowdfunding experience, it would be helpful to have ABC. We didn't have any of ABC, Heneka. That didn't stop us. And I hope people hear that. We decided, okay, yes, we should have these things. We don't have these things. So how can we be creative? And for us, creativity meant reaching out to friends and people that we knew from our podcasts and connections that we had, and saying, here's the idea. This is what we're wanting to do. This is what we're wanting to accomplish. If this resonates with you, would you consider supporting it and sharing it with your friend or possibly being involved on some level? That was the best we could do. And we tried to keep a realistic number to reach with our crowdfunding campaign. And we launched the campaign thinking, maybe within 30 days we can reach this number. We reached that again, a small goal, $10,000, not too high, not too crazy for most. We reached that goal in less than a day, and it was mind blowing. And it was like, okay, this isn't just my aunt saying, "Oh, I love you."
Hold a minute. Before you even go any further, right? So I'm going to now appoint you as my campaign manager for my next crowdfunding campaign. Just get that out there.
Well, I'm not pretending to be the expert on this because clearly not. I mean, we didn't follow the expert advice. I hope that's one of the big takeaways from this episode is not in any way to contradict any of your amazing and intelligent guests, but not every path is the path that might be right for you, and that's okay. You should still be prudent. You should still be responsible. You should still be practical and think through things and not avoid responsibilities. But what episode 75 guest did may not be what works for you. And that is not a bad thing. That's a chance for you to be creative. It's a chance for you to practice your faith if you're a person of faith, which I am. And man, I can't say there's nothing in my life other than, having my child and being married that has put me in a position to practice faith more than business building and being wise with money. It constantly requires faith.
Just so you guys, just so you know, episode 75 has nothing to do with finance, nothing at all, guys. I know it was just a random number. I know.
I know. And with great love and respect to episode 75, whoever that.
Episode 75 was actually with Millett Jones, and she was talking about how to podcast, be a podcast guest.
Well, that's a smart thing too. So, and I hope she does amazing with that in 2019. So,
of course.
but getting back to the finance part, that's what we did. We reached $10,000 in one day. Generous friends and supporters. By the end of the 30-day period, we had over 3 times that initial validation amount. Of course, that still was not enough money to go out and conquer the world and create a thriving business, but it was enough money to validate our idea, and it was enough money to take the next steps. Heneka, I'd love to lie to you and say we knew every next step. We didn't know the next steps. We had to learn as we went. We made mistakes. Some of our mistakes were costly mistakes. In year 2, our business, I don't like saying this on podcasts, but I'll say this. In year 2, our business was $40,000 in debt. Now, for some, that's not a big deal, but for us, that was a big deal. And I was nervous and I was concerned. I was like, my goal is to stay married, and I don't want my wife when my wife's seeing a $40,000 deficit. That's kind of hard for her to, trust me. So when those things are happening, the blessing that comes from when you take action and you're responsible and you're learning as you go is not everything is always going to be perfect, but it does present an opportunity for you to learn from mistakes. And in our mistakes, we were able to set up guardrails. We were able to protect ourselves in very specific areas where there was some failure. And now moving forward, we have several years later where we have been profitable and we've done very well. In January of 2018, my business partner and I went full time doing the work that we do now, because over a couple of years we could have spent money, but we decided, no, let's kind of save that in the business. Let's keep growing the business. So for several years, I was still doing the contract work and working on the business on the side, just trying to practice prudence, trying to be wise. But that led to a place in 2018 where we had enough of a runway, so to speak, where we could go full time. And now, a year later, no looking back. It has been the best decision. It didn't happen overnight. It was not instant, and it wasn't easy. But over those several years, we learned, we protected ourselves when we needed to set up guardrails from making future mistakes based on previous ones. And now we're in a position where we have a business, and it's growing, and it's exciting, and it's something to love, and we do it full time. But
from the stage of the crowdfunding campaign, though, because we want to show, an example of a clear path, maybe a 1, 2, 3. So first you did the crowdfunding campaign. What was next for you in terms of that solid, that financial plan? so that, our peak performers can take something away from that?
Well, I hope the takeaway is getting sound advice, whether, there's lots of ways to do that are not costly, whether that's listening to podcasts like this one, and you should be listening to this one. Reading books, of course, that are free at the library. I don't know if people knew that, but you don't have to spend money on lots of books. There's just so many wonderful resources. We also reached out to friends that had experience in specific areas that we lacked. And we reached out to them and said, hey, can we have a chat? Or if they were in a position where it didn't make sense for us to ask for a favor, we would try to have them as a guest on a podcast, or we would try to do some type of interview. And if that wasn't an option and we really, really needed their advice, then we would set up some kind of, coaching call where we would make sure they were compensated for their time. But there's lots of options, and depending on what your current financial status is and where you're at, it doesn't mean you need to go necessarily spend money on things that may or may not help you right away. That in no way says you shouldn't get coaching. So I think that's the point. You should get you need sound advice. You need to learn from people who have experience, and you can do that a lot of ways. You can do that through coaching and some of the other ways that we talked about, and we did them all, and that helped us kind of figure out the roadmap, as you've said, on where to go next and what to do.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing from you, Jared, is that your financial plan may not necessarily, for each person it's going to be different, and it may not necessarily be tied to all things finance, but you just got to be looking at other things like reaching out to families and friends, reading books and stuff, because what we're seeing is, based on the conversation, is that, knowledge comes from all sources, and guidance will come from all sources, different sources, so that we can take what applies to our lives and make it work for us.
Amen.
So I preach a sermon. Okay, that's it.
Podcast.
I should have a podcast, right? Oh, all right. As we are winding down our conversation, Jared, is there anything that you'd want to leave with our body of peak performers right now? They're contemplating starting a business. They have this great idea, because we know ideas are a dime a dozen. What kind of perhaps a financial advice that you can give, before they launch out into the deep?
The best perspective is to say, okay, how can I make sure this idea is not just something in my mind that I feel very strongly about, but other people will validate by financial resources? And that actually isn't that hard. It could be as simple as you talking to a few trusted people and saying, would you pay for X? It could be as simple as doing a crowdfunding campaign like we did. It could be in the form of sending out a newsletter and asking for support, or offering a very basic, maybe it's a product or a service. There's a number of ways to do that. We wouldn't have time in this podcast to go into all of those, but I think the key takeaway is an idea is wonderful, but an idea isn't always enough to keep you afloat and to make sure that you're doing the things that you need to do as a responsible person toward your family and other things that you're a steward of. You need to make sure that whatever you're doing, you need to test it in a way that proves there is a market and there is someone willing to spend money on what this is. And again, you can look at varieties of ways to test and try that, but my encouragement is if you have a day job, don't just quit a job just because you had that epiphany moment and said, that's it. The people that have that story usually had a substantial financial background of, they had backing to fall on, or or they had some other plan in place. The idea of just quitting a job, you need that income. So start looking at, okay, what can I do to be flexible? Can I work from home to have a little more flexibility? Does it make sense for me to maybe look for roles that are contracted rather than full-time? I think these are starting points to consider. And you must remind yourself that Rome was not built in a day. Great things in almost every circumstance take time to build, and it's okay. That's normal. So set yourself up for the long haul. We live in a time where we have access and we have connection and great opportunity that if we apply ourselves and we commit to the process of being a good steward, of being smart, and validating ideas, a business can not only be started, it can grow and it can serve a lot of people and be very profitable. And none of those are bad things when you're doing it in the right spirit. And I know that your listeners are doing that, Heneka.
Excellent. And so we're closing off and reiterating this point: validate your ideas. And there are many ways to do that. Now, you have been such an amazing guest, Jared. It's such a pleasure to have you. We've been talking with Jared Latigo, and Jared is a corporate change consultant, and I'm sure that you want to be in touch with him. So I'm going to give you now an opportunity, Jared, to share your contact information, your social media platforms.
Well, but before I do that, there's a book. I didn't write this book, but I think this book is helpful. The book is Will It Fly? It's by Pat Flynn. It's very affordable, and there's a lot of really amazing concepts in here that go into deeper detail on how you can validate and how you can continue to be prudent. So that's one book I would encourage you to consider reading. If for some reason you're not in a position to get that book from the library or you can't afford it, go look on various podcast interviews that Pat Flynn has done about that book, and just try to pull from those, because I think that information is just so helpful. As for me, I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. If you Google my name, you're going to find about 100 places to find me. So I think the number one place you should find me is through this podcast. So Heneka, thank you again for being gracious with your time and your platform. And my prayer and my hope is that your business grows and that the people who are listening to this will have success because they're making smart moves and they're getting good advice from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate having you on. All the very best to you.
Yes, Happy New Year and best wishes in 2019.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode with Jared Easley. I look forward to connecting with you next week. In the meantime, please subscribe, rate, and review The Entrepreneurial You if you have not yet done so. Remember, you were born to win, but to be a winner, you must plan to win, prepare to win, and expect to win. What good? Do you have a product or service to put out to the world, but you don't know where to begin? Do you have an idea for a blog? Do you think that having a website is way too expensive and complicated? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, go to HenekaWatkis-Porter.com and sign up to HostGator Web Hosting. For as little as $2.75 per month, you can have the perfect option for your small site or blog. You will have user-friendly building tools and unlimited domains. Go to HenekaWatkis-Porter.com and sign up now for your perfect website.